I thought I'd never uncover why everyone accused me of touching my daughter until I stopped searching. Me and my daughter were moving into a new neighborhood when I saw my face on a poster. It read, "Warning, child predator in the area," with my face printed in the center. I managed to rush Bella inside and take it down before she could see it. But that night I went outside and saw another poster on the telephone pole. This one said I was on the registry for forcible grape of a child under 13. It was written with one of those fancy ink pens, and the eyes were dotted with hearts. I spent hours driving around tearing them down, trying to figure out who would do this. Some looked fresh, some had been there for days. I even called a lawyer, but he said without knowing who to name, we couldn't file for protection. I checked with the only other black family on our street. There were no posters about them. I confronted my neighbor, Mr. White, who'd been glaring at me. He called the cops on me for harassment. I learned not to call anyone after that and figured everything would work itself out. And the next day, I was proven very wrong. My boss called me into his office. "Someone left this on my desk." He slid one of the posters across the table, avoiding all eye contact. "This is fake. You can check the actual registry. I'm sorry. Security will help you with your things." That was it. The whole reason that me and Bella had moved to the neighborhood was gone. I sat in my car doing the math. Severance would last 2 months and we couldn't afford to move. I was trying to figure out how to tell Bella when I found her sitting on the front steps with a bag of frozen peas on her face. "What happened?" She looked up and her left eye was swollen shut. There was blood on her school uniform. "Some kids cornered me in the bathroom." Her voice was thick from crying. They said I probably wanted to be graped because it runs in the family. I don't even know what that means, Dad." My whole body went cold. "How many kids?" 3 boys from the grade above. They pinned me against the wall and kept hitting me and saying stuff about you and what you do to kids, and..." I pulled her into a hug and she sobbed into my shirt. Her whole body was shaking. "Dad, can you homeschool me?" Everything I couldn't give her sat in my stomach like stones. "We'll figure it out, baby." That night we stayed inside with the curtains drawn. Anyone walking by could be the person who wanted us gone. She sat on her bed staring blankly at one of the posters when she asked, "Dad, is Mom gonna use this against you in court next week?" I buried my face in my hands. It was the annual custody review that I'd forgotten about. "No, honey. Dad, please make sure they don't send me back to her," she exclaimed. "You don't understand what it was like before," she whispered, her voice smaller now. "What do you mean?" "When her boyfriend Croc moved in, she made me sleep in the basement. She told me teenage girls give off pheromones that make grown men crazy. Said I had that look that makes men do bad things." "Sweetie pie, why didn't you tell me? I thought it was just normal until I lived with you and realized other kids don't get dress-coded in their own bedroom." The next morning, we walked into the courthouse. Bella had insisted on coming even though I told her she could wait outside. It was supposed to be a 5-minute routine procedure, until my ex-wife's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, we need to address the child's condition." The judge studied Bella, and her eyes widened at her obvious bruises and split lip. "These injuries occurred while in her father's custody," the lawyer said, voice all smooth and concerned. Bella tried to speak, but my ex-wife's lawyer cut her off. "The child will obviously protect her father despite the danger. She's brainwashed." "I'm requesting immediate emergency custody transfer," he continued, "for the child's physical safety." I was glaring right at my ex-wife when I saw it. The corners of her mouth lifted ever so slightly into a smile. The same smile she had when she used to win arguments by making me look crazy. Suddenly, everything clicked. My ex-wife had done all of it, all to win back a daughter she never wanted in the first place. And I guess Bella saw the smile too, because her hand found mine under the table, fingers shaking. The judge turned to look at Bella, and her expression softened when she saw the bruises. "Young lady, would you like to tell me what happened to your face?" My daughter's grip on my hand got so tight I thought she might break my fingers. She stood up slowly, and I could feel her whole body shaking next to me. "Your Honor, the boys at the school did this to me, not my dad." Her voice was quiet but clear. My ex-wife's lawyer jumped up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. "Objection! This child has clearly been coached by her father to lie about these injuries." The judge held up her hand and gave him a look that could freeze water. "Counselor, sit down and let the child speak if she wants to." She nodded at Bella to continue. My daughter took a deep breath, and I watched her straighten her shoulders. "There are posters all over our neighborhood with my dad's face on them saying he's a predator." She pulled out her phone and showed the judge photos she'd taken. "Kids at the school saw them and believed them, and that's why they beat me up in the bathroom." The judge leaned forward to look at the pictures on Bella's phone. "They said I probably liked being hurt because it runs in my family, but I don't even know what that means." Bella's voice got stronger as she kept talking. "When I lived with my mom and her boyfriend Croc, she made me sleep in the basement. I saw my ex-wife shift in her seat and her face went pale. Mom said teenage girls give off pheromones that make grown men crazy, and that I had a look that makes men do bad things. The whole courtroom went quiet except for the court reporter typing. She made me wear baggy clothes even in my own room, and I couldn't come upstairs when Croc had friends over. The judge was writing everything down, and I noticed her pen moving faster and faster. The posters started showing up right before our court dates, and they all have these little hearts dotting the I's just like how Mom writes. Bella pointed at my ex-wife, who was whispering frantically to her lawyer. She's doing this to get me back even though she never wanted me before. My ex-wife's face went from pale to bright red, and she started to stand up, but her lawyer grabbed her arm. The judge studied the photos on Bella's phone for a long time before looking up. I've heard enough for now, and I'm ordering a 15-minute recess. She stood up, and everyone else scrambled to their feet. All parties will remain in the courthouse and available. She walked out through the door behind her bench, and the bailiff followed. My lawyer immediately pulled me toward the corner of the courtroom away from everyone else. This is going better than I expected because Bella speaking up changes everything. He was talking fast and quiet while watching my ex-wife and her lawyer across the room. The judge can see through this emergency custody grab now that your daughter explained what really happened. I could hear my ex-wife and her lawyer arguing in harsh whispers near the other door. You said we had to stick to the plan. Her voice carried even though she was trying to be quiet. Her lawyer shushed her and pulled her further away, but I could still see them gesturing at each other. The 15 minutes felt like 15 hours, but finally the bailiff called us back to order. The judge came back in and we all stood until she sat down. I'm ordering an immediate investigation by Child Protective Services that will evaluate both households. She looked directly at my ex-wife when she said this. I'm also appointing a guardian ad litem to represent the child's interests separately from either parent. My ex-wife's lawyer started to object, but the judge cut him off with a sharp look. Furthermore, I am denying the request for emergency custody transfer at this time. Relief flooded through me so hard I almost fell over. However, I am scheduling another hearing in 2 weeks to review the findings of these investigations. She looked back and forth between me and my ex-wife. I am warning both parties that any harassment or contact outside official channels will be considered contempt of court. Her voice got harder on those last words. Any violation will result in immediate consequences, including possible jail time. My ex-wife opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but her lawyer put his hand on her arm. This hearing is adjourned. The judge banged her gavel and stood up to leave. We waited until she was gone before gathering our stuff and heading for the door. Bella stayed pressed against my side as we walked through the courthouse hallway. The second we got in my car, she completely fell apart. Her whole body shook with sobs, and she couldn't catch her breath. I pulled her across the center console and held her while she cried into my shirt. You were so brave in there, baby. I rubbed her back while she sobbed harder. I'm so proud of you for speaking up and telling the truth. She cried for 20 minutes straight before finally calming down enough to put on her seatbelt. We drove home in silence except for her occasional hiccups from crying so hard. That night after Bella went to bed, I heard something outside, and when I looked through the window, I saw someone at our front door. I grabbed my phone and started recording while creeping toward the door, but whoever it was had already left. There was another poster taped to our door, and this one made my stomach drop. It had a photo of Bella's bruised face from earlier with "like father, like daughter" written underneath in that same fancy pen with hearts dotting the I's. I ripped it down and went straight to the garage to grab my toolbox. I spent the next 3 hours installing security cameras I'd bought months ago but never put up. The whole time I kept checking over my shoulder and jumping at every car that drove by. Around midnight, I called my lawyer even though I knew it was too late. He picked up on the third ring, sounding tired, but when I told him about the new poster with Bella's photo, he woke up fast. He told me to take pictures of everything and save the poster in a plastic bag for evidence. He said he was already working on getting a restraining order against my ex-wife based on what Bella said in court, but this new poster would help our case. The next morning, my phone rang while I was making breakfast, and it was Aaron Dunn, the principal at Bella's school. He said he'd heard about what happened to Bella and wanted to discuss her safety at the school. He was setting up new protocols and asked if we could meet that afternoon. Bella didn't want to go back to the school, but I convinced her to come to the meeting so she could hear what the principal planned to do. We sat in his office while he explained that he'd assigned Bella a safe room she could go to any time she felt unsafe. He gave her a special orange pass that let her leave any class without asking permission, and showed us the room, which had a couch and books and a phone that went straight to his office. He seemed really concerned about what happened and kept apologizing that it happened at his school. 3 days later, I was washing dishes when someone knocked on our door. It was Josephine Watts, the guardian ad litem the judge had appointed. She was younger than I expected, with kind eyes and a soft voice that made Bella relax a little. She spent 2 hours talking with Bella alone in her room while I waited in the kitchen trying not to pace. I could hear their voices but not what they were saying, and every few minutes I'd hear Bella laugh, which made me feel better. After they talked, Josephine came out and asked to see the rest of our house. She took photos of Bella's room and the kitchen and living room, and even looked in our fridge and pantry. She checked that Bella had clean clothes and school supplies and a working computer for homework. She seemed happy with what she saw and told me she'd be visiting Bella's mother's house next. She couldn't tell me what she and Bella talked about, but she said Bella was very mature for her age. A few days after that, my lawyer called to say he was hiring a private investigator named Seth Kramer to figure out who was putting up the posters. Seth used to be a cop and knew how to track down evidence like where the paper came from and who bought those fancy pens. He came to our house to look at the posters I'd saved and took pictures of the handwriting. He said the pens looked expensive and there were only a few stores in town that sold them. About a week later, Seth called with news. He'd tracked down the art store downtown that sold those exact pens and got their security footage from the day before the first posters appeared. The footage showed a woman who looked exactly like my ex-wife buying 3 of those pens. He also found footage from a gas station camera near our neighborhood showing her car at 2 a.m. the same night we found the first batch of posters. Meanwhile, I was trying to find a new job, but it wasn't going well. I had 3 interviews that all started great until they Googled my name. The first interviewer's face changed the second he looked at his computer screen, and he wrapped up the interview in 2 minutes. The second one at least tried to be polite, but I could tell she'd already decided not to hire me. The third guy straight up asked me about the registry claims, and when I explained they were fake, he said he couldn't take the risk. Even though I wasn't on any actual registry, the posters had done their damage online. People had taken pictures and posted them on neighborhood Facebook groups and local forums. When you searched my name, the first results were all about me being a predator, even though none of it was true. Bella started seeing a therapist named Layla Vasquez, who worked with kids who'd been through trauma. The first session was really hard, and Bella came out with red eyes from crying. But she said it felt good to talk to someone who wasn't involved in everything. Layla had this calm way of talking that made you want to tell her things, and Bella actually looked forward to going back the next week. She said Layla was teaching her ways to deal with the anxiety and anger she felt about everything that was happening. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. 2 days later, Josephine called while I was making breakfast, and her voice sounded different, more serious than before. She said she'd just come from visiting my ex-wife's house, and while she couldn't share specific details due to confidentiality rules, she had significant concerns about what she'd observed there. She kept pausing like she wanted to say more but couldn't, and finally just said she'd be filing her report with the court immediately, and that I should make sure Bella continued feeling safe at our home. I thanked her and hung up, my hands shaking a little as I poured cereal for Bella, who was getting ready for school upstairs. That same afternoon, Seth called with news that made my stomach drop. He'd been going through security footage from different businesses near our neighborhood and found something at the gas station on the corner. The camera showed my ex-wife's car parked there at 2:14 a.m. on the exact night we found the first batch of posters. He had clear footage of her getting out with a stack of papers and walking toward our neighborhood before the camera angle cut off. He emailed me the video file and said he was adding it to the evidence folder he was building for my lawyer. The next morning, Principal Dunn called to let me know they'd identified the 3 boys who attacked Bella in the bathroom. All 3 were being suspended for 2 weeks, and their parents had been called in for meetings. But then he sighed and said the boys' parents were trying to blame Bella, claiming she must have started it by spreading lies about her dad being a predator. One parent even threatened to sue the school for suspending her son without proof of who threw the first punch. I could hear the frustration in his voice when he said the school was standing by their decision, but wanted me to know what was being said. Later that week, I got an unexpected call from Matthew Olson, who said he was the HOA board president for our neighborhood. He explained that he'd been getting complaints about the posters for weeks and had started documenting when and where they appeared with photos and timestamps. He'd noticed they always showed up late at night or early morning and offered to provide a formal statement about the pattern he'd observed. He also mentioned that several neighbors had come forward saying they'd seen a woman putting them up, but hadn't gotten a good look at her face in the dark. I gave him my lawyer's contact information, and he promised to send everything he had documented. Things stayed quiet for about a week until my phone rang at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. It was my ex-wife screaming, so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She was yelling that I was turning Bella against her and poisoning her mind, and that she knew I was behind whatever lies Bella had told the Guardian. I fumbled to start recording the call on Bella's old phone while she kept screaming threats about how she'd make sure I never saw Bella again and how everyone would know what kind of person I really was. She went on for almost 5 minutes before hanging up, and I immediately forwarded the recording to my lawyer. He called me back within an hour, even though it was past midnight, and said this was a clear violation of the judge's no-contact order. He filed the contempt charges first thing the next morning, and by noon we had an emergency hearing scheduled for that Friday. The judge listened to the recording with a stone face and then told my ex-wife that any further contact would result in immediate jail time. No warnings, no second chances. My ex-wife's lawyer looked ready to quit right there in the courtroom. A few days later, I was at work when the school called saying Bella was in the nurse's office having a panic attack. Someone had put one of the posters inside her locker and she'd found it when she went to get her lunch. She couldn't stop crying and shaking, and they'd had to call the counselor to help calm her down. Principal Dunn reviewed all the security footage, but the cameras didn't cover that hallway, and they couldn't figure out who did it. He increased security patrols near Bella's locker, but we all knew that wouldn't really solve anything. Meanwhile, Seth had been digging into my ex-wife's online activity and found something interesting. She'd been posting in several local mom groups on Facebook about protecting the community from predators and warning about a dangerous man in the neighborhood. The language she used matched exactly with what was written on the posters, down to specific phrases about keeping children safe. He took screenshots of everything, including the timestamps showing she'd been posting for weeks before the first posters appeared. I thought things might be turning around when I got called for a job interview at a company downtown. The first part went great, and the manager seemed impressed with my experience and references. We talked for almost an hour about the position and the team, and I could tell he was ready to make an offer. Then he asked if there was anything else he should know about, and I could see him glance at his computer screen. I knew he'd Googled me. I explained everything as calmly as I could about the false accusations and the custody battle and how none of it was true. He nodded and said he appreciated my honesty, but I could see it in his eyes that he wouldn't call me back. The risk was just too much for them to take. That same week, Josephine started interviewing Bella's teachers as part of her investigation. Every single one reported that Bella had been a good student who participated in class and turned in her homework on time. But they all noticed she became withdrawn and anxious right after the posters started appearing around the neighborhood. Her math teacher said she'd gone from raising her hand constantly to barely speaking unless called on directly. Her English teacher mentioned that Bella's essays had shifted from creative and bright to dark and worried. The PE teacher said other kids had started avoiding her at lunch, and she'd taken to eating alone in the library most days. 3 weeks later, I was making breakfast when my lawyer called with news that made me drop the spatula. Croc had been arrested the night before on drug charges after cops pulled him over for a broken taillight and found 2 kilos of cocaine in his trunk. He said this changed everything because now Josephine could get a warrant to search my ex-wife's house as part of the custody investigation. I hung up and sat down hard at the kitchen table while Bella ate her cereal and asked what was wrong. I told her it was just work stuff, but my hands were shaking as I poured my coffee. 2 days later, Josephine called to say she'd been to my ex-wife's house with the police, and what they found made her sick. The basement where Bella used to sleep was exactly like she'd described, with a dirty mattress on the concrete floor and no windows anywhere. There was a deadbolt lock on the outside of the door, and the walls had water damage and mold growing in the corners. She took dozens of photos and said the conditions were worse than some abuse cases she'd seen in 20 years of this work. The police officer with her wrote up a report saying no child should ever have been kept in that space. Meanwhile, Layla had been meeting with Bella twice a week and finally sent her report to the court. She wrote that Bella showed clear signs of emotional abuse from her time at her mother's house, including anxiety attacks and trust issues. The therapy sessions revealed that my ex-wife had constantly told Bella she was a burden and that men would hurt her if she wasn't careful. Layla recommended Bella stay with me permanently and continue therapy to work through the trauma. She also noted that Bella's symptoms had gotten worse after the poster campaign started, which showed ongoing harassment. Seth called me that same week saying he'd finally found something solid. He'd been going door to door in our neighborhood showing my ex-wife's photo to anyone who'd talk. An older woman who walked her dog every night recognized her immediately. She said she'd seen my ex-wife putting up posters on telephone poles at 2 in the morning about a month ago. The woman remembered because she thought it was weird someone would be out that late with a staple gun, and she'd watched from her window. Seth got her to sign a statement and even found the security footage from a house across the street that showed my ex-wife's car parked there. The follow-up hearing was scheduled for the next Monday, and I barely slept the whole weekend. We got to court early, and Josephine was already there with a thick folder of evidence. She looked serious as she told me she'd be recommending major changes to the custody arrangement. My ex-wife showed up with her lawyer looking confident until she saw Josephine's folder. The judge called us to order, and Josephine stood up to present her findings. She showed the photos of the basement first, and the judge's face got harder with each picture. Then she read from the police report about the unsafe living conditions and the lock on the outside of the door. She presented Layla's therapy report about Bella's emotional abuse and ongoing trauma. Finally, she showed the witness statement and security footage of my ex-wife putting up the posters. Josephine said in her professional opinion, Bella should live with me full-time, and my ex-wife should only get supervised visits. My ex-wife's lawyer jumped up, arguing this was way too extreme for the situation. He said the basement was just temporary, and the posters couldn't be proven to be harassment. The judge cut him off and started looking through all the evidence herself. She spent 10 minutes reading everything while we all sat there in silence. Her face got angrier as she read the therapy notes about what my ex-wife had told Bella about men. She looked at the basement photos again and shook her head. Then she looked straight at my ex-wife and said she'd seen enough. The judge granted me temporary sole custody effective immediately. My ex-wife would get supervised visits twice a week at a court facility. She extended the restraining order for another year and ordered my ex-wife to pay for all of Bella's therapy costs. She also said if there were any more posters or harassment, she'd consider criminal charges. My ex-wife lost it completely and started screaming that I'd manipulated everyone. She yelled that I'd turned Bella against her and bribed the witnesses to lie. She pointed at me saying this wasn't over and she'd prove what kind of person I really was. The judge ordered her to stop, but she kept screaming about how the whole system was corrupt. 2 security guards had to grab her arms and drag her out while she kept yelling threats. Her lawyer just stood there looking embarrassed and started packing up his briefcase without saying anything. Josephine smiled at me for the first time and said Bella was lucky to have me. That afternoon, Principal Dunn called while we were celebrating with ice cream. He said the parents of the 3 boys who'd attacked Bella wanted to settle out of court. They were offering to pay all medical bills and have their kids transferred to different schools immediately. They also wanted to avoid any criminal charges or publicity about what happened. I talked to my lawyer, who said it was a good deal since assault cases were hard to prove. We accepted the settlement and got a check that covered the emergency room visit, plus some extra for pain and suffering. The boys were gone from Bella's school by the end of the week, and she finally stopped looking over her shoulder in the hallways. 2 days later, Seth came to our apartment with a thick folder and spread papers across our kitchen table. He'd mapped out every poster location with dates and times from security footage and witness statements. His finger traced across a timeline he'd drawn showing court dates marked in red and poster appearances in black. Every single poster had shown up within 48 hours of a scheduled hearing or custody meeting. The pattern was so clear that even I could see it without him explaining anything. He'd gotten statements from 14 different people who'd seen my ex-wife putting them up late at night. One woman even had doorbell camera footage of her stapling them to telephone poles at 3 a.m. Seth said this was the most obvious harassment case he'd ever documented in 20 years of investigative work. My lawyer took one look at the evidence and started drafting defamation charges right away. The same week, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize while making Bella dinner. The man on the other end introduced himself as the owner of a logistics company downtown. He said he'd heard about my situation through a mutual friend and wanted to offer me a job. Turns out he'd been falsely accused of embezzlement 5 years ago and lost everything before proving his innocence. He understood what it was like to be unemployable because of lies and wanted to help. The position paid less than my old job, but had flexible hours for court dates and full benefits. I started the next Monday, and my new boss told me to take whatever time I needed for legal stuff. Meanwhile, Bella's teachers started calling with good news for the first time in months. Her grades were going back up and she was participating in class discussions again. Her English teacher said she'd even made a friend, a girl who'd stood up for her when someone tried spreading rumors. The girl had told everyone that her own dad was falsely accused once, and people needed to stop believing everything they heard. They ate lunch together now, and Bella actually smiled when she talked about school. 3 weeks later, we had to go to the first supervised visit between Bella and her mother. The court had assigned a supervisor who would sit in the room and document everything that happened. We drove to the Family Services building, and Bella's hands shook the whole way there. The visit was supposed to last 2 hours, but ended after 40 minutes. My ex-wife spent the entire time telling Bella she needed to tell the truth about what really happened. She kept saying I'd brainwashed her and that she knew Bella wanted to come home. The supervisor tried redirecting the conversation, but my ex-wife wouldn't stop pressuring Bella to recant her testimony. Bella started crying and asked to leave, which the supervisor immediately granted. The supervisor wrote a detailed report about how my ex-wife had violated the visit guidelines by discussing the case. She recommended reducing visit frequency and increasing supervision levels for any future contact. My lawyer used this report when he filed the defamation lawsuit the next week. With Seth's evidence and the supervisor's documentation, he said we had one of the strongest cases he'd ever seen. The lawsuit asked for damages covering my lost wages, emotional distress, and Bella's therapy costs. It also demanded a public retraction of all false statements and permanent cessation of harassment. Josephine called to check on us after reading the supervised visit report. She said she was recommending that Bella continue individual therapy and suggested we start family counseling together. She explained that we'd both been through significant trauma and could benefit from learning coping strategies as a team. She gave us 3 therapist names who specialized in families dealing with custody battles and false accusations. We started seeing one of them 2 weeks later, a woman who had us do exercises about rebuilding trust and safety. She taught us breathing techniques for when we felt panicked and ways to support each other during hard moments. Bella said it helped to have someone neutral to talk to about everything without feeling like she was burdening me. I admitted it was good to process my anger about the situation in a healthy way instead of bottling it up. The therapist gave us homework assignments like writing in journals and doing activities that made us feel safe. Meanwhile, my new job was going better than expected despite everything else happening. My boss never questioned when I needed to leave for court or therapy appointments. He'd been through the system himself and knew how much time it all took. For the first time since losing my previous job, I could pay rent without checking my bank balance 3 times. I even managed to put a little money in savings for emergencies. My coworkers didn't know about the posters and treated me like any other employee. 3 months passed with supervised visits every 2 weeks that kept going badly. My ex-wife couldn't stop trying to manipulate Bella into coming back. She'd cry and say she missed her daughter while simultaneously telling her she was making bad choices. The supervisor documented every violation and inappropriate comment in detailed reports. After the 6th visit ended early due to Bella's distress, the judge called for a review hearing. She read through 3 months of supervision reports with her jaw getting tighter with each page. She looked at my ex-wife and said the temporary arrangement had clearly not improved the situation. The judge made the custody order permanent with my ex-wife losing all unsupervised access to Bella indefinitely. She could only see her twice a month at the court facility with a supervisor present at all times. My ex-wife would also have to complete parenting classes and therapy before any changes could be considered. 2 days after that hearing, my ex-wife's lawyer filed a motion to withdraw from her case. The filing cited irreconcilable differences and fundamental disagreements about legal strategy. He was dropping her from both the custody case and the defamation lawsuit we'd filed against her. 3 weeks later, Bella came home from the school with a paper in her hand and asked if she could speak at the school assembly about bullying. Principal Dunn had already signed off on it and said he thought it would help other kids understand what false accusations could do to families. I watched her practice her speech in the living room for days, standing on the coffee table and using note cards she'd written out by hand. The morning of the assembly, I sat in the back of the auditorium with sweaty palms watching her walk up to the microphone. She talked about how rumors spread like wildfire and how kids believed things without asking questions first. She explained how the posters about me weren't true, but the damage was already done when kids beat her up in the bathroom. Her voice cracked once, but she kept going, telling everyone that words have power and believing lies can destroy innocent people. When she finished, the whole auditorium was quiet for a moment before the teachers started clapping. After the assembly, 3 different parents stopped me in the parking lot to apologize for keeping their kids away from Bella. One mom said she'd torn down posters herself after hearing Bella speak and realizing she'd been part of spreading lies without proof. Another dad shook my hand and said he was sorry for believing the worst without checking facts first. Meanwhile, the defamation case was heating up because my ex-wife had hired a new lawyer who tried arguing she was just protecting the community from a potential threat. Seth's evidence destroyed that defense in court when he showed the timeline of posters appearing right before custody hearings. The lawyer tried claiming coincidence, but Seth had receipts from the art store, security footage of her car in our neighborhood at night, and witness statements from people who saw her putting up posters. My lawyer presented everything in a clear pattern showing deliberate harassment meant to win custody through lies. The judge took 2 weeks to review everything before calling us back for the verdict. We sat in the courtroom while she read through her decision, explaining how the evidence clearly showed malicious intent to damage my reputation and employment. She awarded damages for my lost wages from getting fired, the therapy costs for Bella, and extra money for emotional distress caused by the false accusations. The amount wasn't huge, but it would help us start fresh and pay off the legal bills that had been piling up. My ex-wife's face turned red when the judge then addressed the criminal side of things. She was charged with criminal harassment based on all the evidence Seth had gathered about the poster campaign. The prosecutor offered her a plea deal to avoid jail time if she agreed to probation and community service. Part of the deal included staying away from us permanently and getting a psychological evaluation to address whatever made her think this was okay. She took the deal rather than risk going to trial where she might get actual jail time. At work, my boss called me into his office one afternoon, and I thought something was wrong until he smiled and offered me a promotion. He said watching me show up every day despite everything going on proved I was reliable and dedicated. The new position came with better pay and benefits that would help us rebuild our savings. I accepted immediately and called Bella from the parking lot to share the good news. She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. 2 months later, Bella brought home her report card with straight A's for the first time since everything started. She'd made new friends who knew the whole truth and didn't judge her for it. Her teachers wrote notes about how much she'd improved and how she was participating more in class discussions. We celebrated with pizza and ice cream while she told me about her plans to try out for the debate team next year. The neighborhood had changed too after everything came out in court. Matthew from the HOA organized a block party specifically to welcome us properly after all the harassment we'd faced. People brought food and apologized for believing the posters without questioning them. Some neighbors admitted they'd been scared to speak up even when they had doubts about the accusations. Mr. White even came over with a pie his wife made and mumbled something about being wrong to call the cops on me. During one of our regular therapy sessions, Layla pulled me aside while Bella was in the bathroom. She said Bella had made remarkable progress processing the trauma and was building healthy coping mechanisms for the future. The nightmares had stopped, and she wasn't checking locks obsessively anymore. Layla explained that Bella was learning to trust again and developing resilience that would serve her well as she grew up. She recommended we continue sessions monthly instead of weekly since Bella was doing so well. A year passed with things getting better every month, and Bella surprised me one afternoon by asking if she could legally change her last name to just mine. She'd been thinking about it for months and wanted to cut the last connection to her mother, who still refused to admit what she'd done to us. We filed the paperwork at the courthouse, and the clerk said it would take about 6 weeks to process everything. Bella counted down the days on her calendar, and when the approval letter finally came, she practically ran to the DMV to get her new ID. She held that little plastic card, and tears rolled down her face while she kept touching her new name printed there. She told me she finally felt like she belonged somewhere safe and didn't have to carry her mother's name anymore. A few days later, my ex-wife's probation officer called to verify she was following the no-contact order that the judge had put in place. The officer went through her checklist, asking if there had been any attempts at contact through phone, mail, email, or third parties. I confirmed there hadn't been anything, and she said the order would stay in effect for the full probation period. Meanwhile, Bella had been working on her art again and decided to apply for a summer program she'd been too scared to try for before everything happened. She spent weeks on her portfolio, painting these incredible pieces that showed everything we'd survived, but also the hope she felt now. The acceptance letter came on a Saturday morning, and she screamed so loud the neighbors probably heard her. The program director wrote a personal note saying her work showed remarkable emotional depth, and they were excited to have her join them. At work, my boss called me in for my annual review and slid a promotion offer across his desk. The management position came with better pay, full benefits, and more flexible hours that would let me be there for Bella's school events. He said watching me show up every day through the worst time of my life proved I could handle anything the job threw at me. I signed the papers right there and called Bella from the parking lot to tell her the good news. 2 years flew by with Bella thriving in ways I never imagined possible after everything we'd been through. Her high school graduation day arrived, and she'd been chosen to give a speech as one of the honor students. She stood at that podium in her cap and gown looking so grown up and thanked her teachers for their support. Then she looked right at me in the audience and said she wanted to thank her dad for never giving up on her when the whole world tried to tear them apart. The entire auditorium erupted in applause, and people stood up clapping while I tried not to cry in front of everyone. After graduation, she showed me the acceptance letter from her dream college that had arrived that morning. They'd given her a scholarship based on an essay she'd written about overcoming adversity, which she'd titled, "The Truth About My Dad," without telling me. She let me read it, and every word showed how she'd processed everything we went through and came out stronger. The admissions committee wrote that her essay was one of the most moving pieces they'd ever received from an applicant. Moving day came faster than I expected, and we loaded up a rental truck with all her dorm stuff. We drove the 3 hours to campus playing her favorite music and talking about her plans for classes and maybe joining the debate team. Setting up her tiny dorm room took most of the day with her new roommate helping us figure out where everything would fit. When it was time for me to leave, she walked me back to the truck and wrapped her arms around me tight. She said she knew she could go out and try new things because I'd always be there if she needed me. She was right about that and always would be. That's where we'll leave it for today. Thanks for hanging out with me. I really do love sharing these moments. Hope you carry a little of this good energy with you. If you want more, hit that subscribe button and come back soon.